Everyone, thanks for being here. Welcome to the Sustainable Solutions Seminar Series. We're about midway through the term now. See some familiar faces. Thanks for coming back. Quick housekeeping reminders. Please turn off your cell phones now, if you don't mind. And as a reminder, when we do have question and answer discussion period at the end, we are going out live on a webinar this evening, so we will need to use the floor mic for questions so that they can be heard by all of us in the room and everyone watching online. We are very fortunate this evening to have Susan Anderson join us from the City of Portland. She is the director of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. She'll probably have more to say about the Bureau's work, but it certainly builds on sustainability principles that are integrated into the core of the city's planning efforts, including urban design, business and residential services, and government operations. Prior to her leadership in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, Susan has held other positions within the city, including the position of Director of Office of Sustainable Development, Director of the Energy Office, and prior to that, a position with the Oregon Department of Energy. She is an alumna from University of Oregon, and with all of that, I will ask you to welcome Susan Anderson this evening. Thank you, Susan.
Good evening. Good evening. All right. Thanks for coming in out of the sunshine. When I left to come over here, my daughter said, "I don't get this job you have. You have to go. It's nice out. Why do you have to go now? It's nighttime." So I appreciate those of you who are coming here today. So Bob asked me, do you all know Bob? Bob Costanza. Okay, so Bob runs the center. To come and talk to you about sustainability solutions and here in Portland, but really everywhere, and why, from my perspective, some programs thrive and some programs fail, and are there some ingredients for making some programs be effective over the long run? So I'm going to talk for, I think we have an hour and a half, so I'll talk for half hour, 40 minutes or so, and then we can have a discussion about some of these things. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, about my job, walk you through some ideas that I have about how you promote sustainability, how you actually just promote change in any kind of setting, whether it's at work, at home, in your neighborhood, any of those places. The ability to create change, that there is sort of a recipe for success, at least from my perspective. So first, a little bit about me. As Robbie said, I went to the University of Oregon. I was actually born in the Midwest, lived in the Midwest, the East Coast. My dad woke up in a snowstorm when I was 12 in Detroit and said, "We're moving to LA." And so we moved to Southern California. I lived in California for 10 or 12 years, and then for the last 20 years or so have lived in Oregon. I've lived in cities, I've lived in suburbs, I owned a wholesale nursery out in the country for 10 years. So I really feel like I've had, from a urban and regional planning perspective, a lot of perspectives from all over the United States as a resident. I have 3 different degrees, one in economics, one in environmental science, and another in urban and regional planning. And I also have 3 great kids who, one of the reasons, of course, why I do what I do, because they're very much right there making me think about the future and making sure that the things that I do and how I spend my time, that I try to make it for a better place for them. Back to my education, since we're here at a university. I went to undergrad at UC Santa Barbara, and besides going to the beach and surfing and playing Frisbee, I studied a couple different topics, and I had a lot of conflict about my studies. I originally was working on biology and ecology, and my parents thought that all this environmental stuff, that wasn't a real degree. So do you have any parents like that? So just that what is this environmental stuff that maybe you should get something a little more practical. So I also got a business economics degree to kind of provide some balance, and I'm a Libra, so I thought these two things, I'd have sort of the yin and yang here of kind of my studies. And what I found was that there wasn't much balance. That these two areas of study, science and then economic theory, were pretty much opposing camps. In the morning, I'd go to classes about ecology and biology and physics, and I'd learn that science was truth. Science was where the facts were, and scientists tell us that that's how decisions should be made. And then an hour later, I'd go to an economics class, and I'd listen to stories about Adam Smith and rational consumers, and how at the end of the day, we all think about supply and demand and price signals, and that really, that's how decisions are made. And then I got out in the real world, and I got a job, and let's see, this isn't working. There you go. Found that it wasn't science, it's not economic theory, but that very much it's politics and social norms, and that's how real decisions are made. What people feel is the right thing to do matters more than data, at least from my perspective. And what everybody else in the room is thinking matters even more. There's a famous saying by somebody that says, when we're free to do what we please, we usually imitate others. As humans, that's who we are. We like to copy each other. For most of us, that means, that's how we make decisions. Some of us love the facts, and some of us will study them. We revel in them. We love our numbers and our graphs and doing analysis, but facts don't motivate us very much, at least not in the same way that stories do, that emotions do, and really being a part of a group. And there's probably a whole field of behavioral psychology around this, but what I've learned is more, sort of the seat of the pants look at this. And when I look at how decisions are made and how we try to impact people who are making decisions about their behavior at work or at home, or in their community about how to be more sustainable, I really think that decisions are made in three different ways. In the head, in the heart, or what I call by the book. In our head, we're very deliberative. When we're in our head, we are looking at facts, we're looking at figures, we're really analytical, we're linear. And the thing about this is you can't make decisions like that really fast. If you're going to do analysis, it means it's going to take a long time, and it's really about proving something to yourself. So you've got your tables, you've got your graphs, and how many of you like to make your decisions that way? So there's a whole bunch of you. You just love this. Well, the problem is in the real world, you can't lead that way because nobody else has the time to sit with you and study it all and understand it. So I think a lot of people make decisions in our heart, with our emotions. And I don't mean sort of lovesick teenager, making poor choices kind of emotions, but I mean that we do them, we are intuitive. Our emotions bring in our fears, they bring in our hopes and our wishes and our dreams. Decisions of the heart are, they're full of images, they're full of stories, and they are often snap decisions. They're sort of automatic. We don't actually even realize how we got to the decision, but there we are, and we can't even break it into pieces. We just know what we want to do, and there we are. The third kind of decision making is something that I'd really call by the book, and it's sort of the unwritten rules of any culture. So it would be really great if when you moved to Portland, you got the Portland book. And it said, here's the rules of living here, and it's sort of what's in Portlandia, but it's a whole bunch of other kinds of things. And, and that book is really different if you live in South America, or if you live, in New York, or even if you live, in Asia or somewhere else. So the thing is that because we like to follow each other, it's sort of one of our innate things as humans, we want to do what's normal. This is sort of the copycat thing. We definitely like to be just a little bit special, so we don't want to be right in the mainstream. We want to conform, but we also really like it when we hit that sweet spot of sort of feeling special and different and embracing something that's new on the cutting edge, but there's enough other people around us doing the same thing that you feel safe in that kind of a decision. And that's where the decision is right now for a lot of sustainability issues. There are new technologies we're trying out, there are new behaviors we're trying out, but you don't really have to be the first person to do it, but you can be early enough that you sort of get bragging rights. And I think that's something that we really like to do, at least most people. So that's pretty much my experience in how people make choices. And it's been really not something I understood clearly when I started doing work in this field maybe 20 years ago. It's sort of evolved over time, but it's something that when I'm setting out to design a program, if I'm working with a nonprofit or I'm working with the city or even with a small business, really figuring out how people make decisions, how you can affect what they do, how you can affect what people's choices are and what they buy. In my business at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, we're all about long-range planning. We're about thinking about the future, but we're also very much about helping people make sustainable choices for today. So, you could have the best sustainability technologies in the world. So, how many of you, is anybody working on solar technologies or energy efficiency technologies? I saw a bunch of social psychologist sorts of folks here. But when I go and do this talk with, predominantly for the first 10 years of my career, I was focused on energy efficiency primarily and renewables. And I would be the only person in the room without, master's degrees in engineering and physics and all about the technical details. And I would go to these retreats where they were for nerds, sort of, where we would have people just talking technology all day long. And every once in a while I'd just be like, so who's going to buy this? And who's ever going to use this technology? And they'd be, yeah. Well, now at those same seminars, it's now a mix of people who are marketing specialists, who are behavior psychologists, and they've now finally come together and realized that you really need to have both pieces of the picture there. You can't just have the greatest technologies. Your technology is not going to solve the problem of global warming, climate change, of environmental pollution, all of those things, without getting people to accept the ideas, to change the behavior, and to actually buy the different kinds of goods. You're not going to be able to regulate that kind of behavior or that kind of purchases. Anyway, back quickly to my background, and I graduated from the University of Oregon in planning, and then ended up here as director of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, which is probably the coolest, most interesting job in the city of Portland. When I went to school at U of O, after I got out, I couldn't find a job in planning right away. So how many of you got out of graduate school and couldn't find a job right away in your specialty of field, right? Okay. So I went and worked for a marketing firm because I was an okay writer, and learned really quickly how to write 7- and 10-word sentences. Nothing longer than that. So my staff now still just, I drive them crazy. So you've been busy writing academic papers for years and years, and then you realize to change behavior, you need to get those down to very short sentences, to very succinct thoughts. Over the years, I've had a lot of different jobs. I've owned 2 different companies. I owned an environmental consulting firm and a wholesale nursery out about 20 miles west of here. I worked, again, for the marketing firm. I was a planner in a few cities. I worked for the state Oregon Department of Energy, and then for the city Energy Office and Office of Sustainable Development. And then 2 years ago, I kind of came full circle, and we merged what was the Bureau of Planning with the Office of Sustainable Development. So that's who I am and what I do a little bit. I thought now I'd talk through some examples of how, from my perspective, how some programs have been developed in Portland, how services have been developed in both private and nonprofit sectors that have been successful. So I'm going to focus predominantly on green building first, both innovative, like the building there with the wind turbines, and then some of the historic facilities that have been redone here in Portland to great success. So how did the city get involved in green building in the first place? And is it really a success here? We actually, at this point, probably have hundreds of people who are making a living, who live in Portland, who are doing energy efficiency. Actually, there's probably, I think it's something like 1,200 people now that are doing architecture, engineer, designing, focused on green building technologies and services and design, and are doing that work locally, but most of the work they're doing is being exported to the nations in the south of us, California, but also throughout the U.S. and to other places. And also here in Portland, so how many of you know what the LEED green building standard is? Okay, so almost everybody. It's a standard, a point-based system that measures energy efficiency, water efficiency, indoor air quality, and other measures of sustainability in a building. Well, 10 years ago, there were a couple. And 10 years ago, if you got certified or you were a silver LEED building, that was big news. And in the rest of the United States, still, if you're a silver or gold LEED building, it still makes, the Daily Journal of Commerce, the Business Journal, in those communities, it would be right there. In Portland, if you're not gold or platinum, you're not even going to get in the paper. And in fact, if you don't build to the basic LEED standard, you won't get tenants. And so LEED has now become sort of just another word or expectation, kind of the new norm for quality construction here in Portland. So I think things have really shifted over the past 10 years. So let's see, back in the mid-1990s, I was director of what was called the Portland Energy Office. And the Energy Office was sort of a hybrid of city government and a nonprofit. They paid for me basically in rent. We had anywhere from 5 to 12 or 13 staff people. And our focus was almost exclusively on energy efficiency in buildings, residential, commercial, government buildings, but also on renewable resources, solar, wind, and alternative fuels. Somewhere, I think it was mid-90s, late 90s, we were working with some other cities, Austin, Texas, Seattle, San Francisco, Chicago, Boulder, the usual characters. And we all said to each other very clearly that energy's boring. You can't see it. It's hidden in the walls. The whole focus on energy efficiency, sure you can save some money, but other than that, it's not very fun. It's furnaces and insulation and heat pumps and stuff. So it wasn't. We always had been doing this work by that point, some of us for 7 or 8 years, and we're just so frustrated because we were using our head. We were showing data. We were showing people savings, but we weren't telling stories. And so clearly, we found out that people really wanted more. And they wanted to be able to live and work in places like these buildings here that were great to live in, that were great to work in, that had wonderful light, that had great materials. They wanted light-filled spaces, recycled materials. They wanted to be able to tell a story about the materials. How many people have been at their friend's house in their kitchen and had them point to the floors and say, these floors came from the elementary school over in Woodburn, and they tell this whole story about the materials that they redid their kitchen with. And so actually in Portland, it's becoming a one-upping thing. So if you hang out with the people I hang out, we all one-up each other about, well, my cabinets came from, this historic building built in 1890, an old growth. And it's sort of this ridiculousness, except that that's what sold it. We also did all the energy efficiency stuff because it kind of came along as a package. We did water efficiency. We looked at indoor air issues. But what makes people take action isn't just saving money. It's definitely that they want to be a part of a bigger story. Same thing with solar. Think of all the people who put solar on their roof, and they want to put it on the front of their house. Even really when, this is really true if you talk to solar installers, even if the best place to put it is maybe on the side of the house because they want to show their neighbors that they're going solar. So again, maybe that's nobody in this room. We'd all like to think that's not us, but people take this kind of behavior change because they want to be a part of something bigger. So our friends in Austin, because they had a public electric utility and had a lot of cash, and we didn't have any here, they were first. They went out, they developed this green building program. We watched, we learned, we took all of their information, and Seattle and Portland followed a couple of years later. Seattle also has a public utility, so they had a lot of cash. We had, I think, like $23,000 left over from a U.S. Department of Energy grant to start at the program. And I think it's one of those things where it's like necessity is the mother of invention. By doing that, it caused us to build lots and lots of partnerships. So how many of you work for a nonprofit or a government? So maybe almost half. So, or a university or for a small business, that's a startup, because none of them ever have much cash. You can't do any of this work on your own, and if you have a couple dozen partners with the same mission as you, the same goals as you, you get to use other people's money, and that, I think, is also a real key to a lot of these things working out. So what did we do when we decided we wanted to focus away from energy and kind of to take the whole picture of sustainability and green building? First question was to ask why. So why did we want to do this in the first point? What's the point? What's the real problem? Every single day, it happened today, we're working on the issue of gentrification. What do we do? We did such a great job making Portland such a sustainable place that the diversity of many of our neighborhoods has shifted and changed. So how do we deal with that? Well, I'm in a room with 30 people, and they're all tossing out ideas for how to solve the problem. And after about 10 or 15 minutes, I was thinking about tonight's presentation, and I said, wait, what's the problem here? And we always jump to solutions, and we usually haven't defined the problem. Another issue about that is that when we do stop to define the problem, we're defining it from our perspective instead of the perspective of the clients, the customers, the people who are actually making the decisions. And so when you're looking at, as nonprofits and as governments, as universities, when we're trying to sell an idea, basically, when we're trying to make change, when we're trying to start up a sustainability effort, it's really no different. We're selling an idea, which is really no different than selling shoes. And you need to know who your clients are, who your customers are, and what makes them change behavior and what will make them sort of buy your idea. And I really think this is a big failure point in program design. In general, I have a lot of friends that have worked at Portland General or Pacific over the years, and they come up with energy efficiency program, especially in the early years. And we would do these great brochures, and we'd come up with great financial incentives and loans and tax credits, and then we'd throw open the doors and say, y'all come, and nobody'd show. And we'd wonder why. And it was because we were defining the problem and the solutions from our perspective instead of going out and really figuring out what we needed. So I think with that in mind, there's really two kinds of data and information that we need in order to be able to create new programs, to create kind of movement on sustainability. And the first I'd call scientific or fact-based data. This is the kind of stuff that we're usually used to doing, literature searches, research, doing lots of analysis, what have other people done, what's worked, what hasn't worked. The second is to find out what do people really think. And this we call community wisdom. So in planning, especially in Portland, the city that loves to plan and loves to meet, we go out and listen. And we go out and hear what the perceptions are of people, because community wisdom and perception is really different and often kind of opposite of what truth and fact are. And it happens all the time. I can think of dozens of examples in Portland. One of them would be in the Northwest. if you're trying to reduce your carbon footprint, people will think that it's better to get out of their car than to turn off the lights. Because, of course, we have hydropower, and so there's not a lot of emissions from that, so we really don't need to worry about it. Well, the truth is that that's not true at all. About 40% of our electricity comes from coal. The other 25 to 30% is from natural gas, and only about 30% or less, 25 to 30% is from hydropower here in Portland. So how many people knew that? Like a few, right? So we all think we're hydro. If you're in Seattle, almost all their power comes from hydro. And this is some archaic system of how we were a private utility with PGE, and so public utilities get first dibs on the hydropower system. So you're going to go affect your carbon footprint. You think, because you have community wisdom and perception, you think you're making a good choice, but you really aren't. And so there's just a lot of information. So that does tell us one thing, that data is really important, but you have to get it into the hands of the people who are going to be making decisions with it. And we find out we're in the midst of doing what's called the Portland Plan, which is a 25-year strategic plan for the city, sort of like the beginnings of what will soon be the comprehensive plan, the land use plan for the city. And in doing that, we did reams, literally 4 feet of background reports on every topic affecting the city: land use, transportation, housing, environmental issues, water quality, air quality, all of those things, and found out hundreds of facts that people really don't know about their city. So those things are important, but you've got to get them out to change perception. 2 other examples real quick, more from a social sustainability perspective, because I think a lot of times when we think sustainability, we're primarily thinking about air quality, water quality, climate change, habitat issues, and not thinking about people. And so one example here in Portland is about diversity. How many of you read the Sunday paper? There was a story about how diverse we are, how diverse we're becoming a little less diverse. So it's several of you. Well, it said there were something like, 84% white here in Portland. So we're one of the whitest cities in America. And so when you just look at that one fact and not the rest of the facts that are underneath it, you think if we're doing a long-range plan, that's what we're thinking about. Well, it ends up that more than 50% of the kids in Portland public schools right now are racial or ethnic minorities. So the Portland that's going to be Portland in 20 years is going to be a very different place. And with different perspectives, with different problems, with different issues. And so knowing the facts is really important. One more fun fact, just because this is one that I think nobody knows either, is about education. So I keep doing this audience participation thing here, sorry, but I won't have any hand raising this time. I'll have you shout out or something. What is the dropout rate for kids in Portland public schools? 25%. 25%? I thought like 15 or 20. So 25. Anybody higher? 30? 30? The truth is, 40% of kids in Portland drop out. If you start counting in 8th grade instead of their senior year. So kids start dropping out at an early age, and only 60% of our kids finish in 4 years. Some kids might go on and get a GED or something else, but that's another 10% maybe that shaves off. So we can't be, a sustainable city if our kids, can't function and if they're not prepared for the world. So education and environment and business, these things are all linked together. And we tend to focus, some of us, on the environmental issues. Another fun fact related to that is only 1 kid out of 10 in Oregon that starts in 1st grade will go through high school and then go on through college in 4 years. So in 16 years, they've gone through and finished college. That's only 1 in 10. So the other fun fact related to that is we're a really highly educated city, higher than most, way above the average. We have way more people with graduate degrees, bachelor's degrees here, but they're not from here. They're from other places. And so we are importing people with degrees in education and the people that are here aren't getting out. So these are just kind of the kinds of things I think as we're looking at solar and energy efficiency and recycling and green building and all of these other things that we want to promote as part of sustainability, that we have to think about diversity, about racial and ethnic minorities. We have to think about kids because these things are all connected. So let me talk a little bit about what I see are sort of three components for any kind of a successful sustainability solution. And from my perspective, you need three things. One is political champion, political support. You need community support. You need to have demand for change, whether it's from businesses, from residents, from a neighborhood. And then you need excellent program design and delivery and evaluation. And I have all sorts of friends and lots of people in my office that are really good at that last circle there over on the right. We know how to design programs. And we actually, a lot of the things I talked about in the beginning, we're good at that. We go out and get community wisdom. We get the facts. We do all the pieces. But a lot of them, they hate the politics or they're scared of it. Or they don't really want to go out and have to build community support because it's messy and it takes a really long time and you have to talk to all those people. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that you can't be effective if you sit in your office in sort of a vacuum and think you're doing great program design and delivery and even doing great evaluation if you're not out talking with people. And you'll never get any resources to actually make change without a champion. And so if you are part of a government, then that means you need the mayor or you need a council member. If you're part of a company, it means you need the CFO or COO or CEO. And if it's your household, then it's you or your mom or your dad or your partner. But there's always got to be a champion, someone who does that push and who has the capacity to have the resources. So two ideas that we've talked about so far. One is that you need facts and community wisdom and perceptions. That those are both important. You need both. And that you need political champions, community support, and great program design. So I'm going to go back to the green building example and kind of talk through what we called a 10-step process here. When we started the green building program, we didn't have the 10-step process. We kind of bungled our way through it and just bumped along, figuring it out as we went. But as we look backwards, these are the things that we did in order to make it a success. First, we got lots of data, got the facts right, found out what all the other cities were doing, lots of background reports. We worked with Denmark, we worked with Germany, we were working with countries and cities all over the place to find out what were the best practices. And then after we had all the facts, we said, well, in this case, community wisdom was builders, architects, engineers, designers, all the supply side, plus homeowners, renters, business owners who were tenants in buildings. What were the things that they wanted in a green building program? What did they think the problems were? And why weren't those things happening? So we gathered everybody together in sort of like a big event. We thought 40 or 50 people would show up. That morning, like 180 people show up at this little room, so we had to move the whole thing to another building. Who knew? This was 1999. I had an intern who was running the program, who was, totally floored and overwhelmed. We had gotten a great speaker to kick things off, sort of inspirational. We gave people lots of data, fed them lots of facts for about 2 hours in the morning. And then we had an entire afternoon, 4 or 5 hours, just focused on problem solving. I shouldn't say that. On problems. We weren't solving at all. Every time anyone threw out a solution, we told them they had to be quiet or they could write it down on a piece of paper and save it for later. So we actually ended up coming up with a huge list of reasons, of barriers to why green building wasn't happening. And they were financial and technical and they were spiritual. They were all sorts of reasons. They were political. We ended up doing 5 all-day workshops after that, one on new residential construction, existing residential, new and existing commercial, and then a separate one for government buildings. And we took all of this community wisdom, all of the facts, we kind of put this all together and came up with a report. And the title of it there, number 5, is the High Performance Building Options Report. And that was one of the first things, the first outcomes of the program, which was that we shouldn't call it green, because at least not for everybody. That's changed now, 10 years later. But we learned that green turned a lot of people off. The people that the small builders, and most of the housing in Portland was being done by people who built less than 10 houses a year. So not necessarily your most liberal group, not necessarily. You said the word green, they thought of liberal hippies, and they didn't want anything to do with this. They wanted to hear words that made sense to them. And so we focused a lot on high performance. We focused a lot on looking at ways to save money, things that made sense to the people that were involved. So that was 10 years ago. Lots has changed. Now we want both green and high performance buildings. There's definitely a market for green. It means something different to a lot of people. Now you can say green and people will think smart technologies, high performance, great design, all of those things together. But that wasn't always true. Again, saving money, hugely important for promoting green building, but not the first thing. It ends up that we're really short-term thinkers as people. And so if I say I'll give you $100 today, or in 5 years from now I'll give you $200, you can double your money. That's pretty, 20% rate of return. Everybody in this room almost will take $100 today, because we want stuff now. Even if I said I'll give you 2 cookies right now, or you got to wait 3 hours and you get 4, people want stuff now. And so saying to people that over the next 12 years this will pay back, and not only that, you'll make money. Not something, even with a great rate of return, even if it has a payback for industrial customers in Oregon, to get them to invest, you have to have an 18-month payback or shorter. That's been what we've proven out. And so if it's going to take longer than 18 months or 2 years, they won't invest in it. And basically they're getting their money back in 2 years, and from then on they're going to have huge amount of money saved. So people have really short discount rates. I think when it comes to green buildings, the reason that people want to invest in them as for commercial or for residential, when you're making changes in your house, is because you want to be able to tell the story. You think it's hip, you think it's cool. You want to be able to live in those kind of places. I think it's really similar to bike riding in Portland, or climate change. We don't take action on green building because we actually think we're going to save the climate. Or we don't ride our bikes because we think we're going to conquer global warming. We do it for other reasons. Climate change is one of those issues that is just too big and scary and has a really long discount rate to cause action. And so in Portland, honestly, there's probably 10 to 20% of the people that do all sorts of actions for climate change. But for most cities in the U.S., that's down around 1 or 2%. And so people need other reasons to take action. So back after we got the high-performance building options report completed, we had about 100 ideas to solve all the problems. So how did we winnow those down? How did we come from this huge list of options and ideas and actually come up with something that was meaningful? So one of the tricks of the trade that we have to do that is something we call, it's just like a toolkit. Lots of items there. I won't go through them all. But when we get to the program design stage, if someone had handed me this list, 15 or 20 years ago, my life would have been so much easier. Because what happens is you do that thing where you just start throwing out, well, we should get financial incentives, or no, we should get people all together and we should collaborate and build a partnership, or we should, you have all of these different ideas. And when you're trying to create sustainable solutions, you need to be able to look at all of these things and identify which ones make sense, who's your market, what are you trying to change, and what are you trying to impact. So what we did was we came up with a 3-year work plan, looking at what we're going to do internally for city facilities, externally. We had technical assistance, financial assistance, and then we thought it was really important to model behavior within city facilities, but also to do demonstration projects because just like energy is boring because it's hidden, you need to have green building be something that people can see and touch and feel. They wanted to be able to kick the tires of it. They wanted to be able to go and look at these kinds of projects before they would take them on for themselves. So we created a whole slew of different programs and projects. None of this would have happened if I hadn't been able to get political support. And so, again, really important key in terms of being able to finance the work, in terms of being able to bring together the partnerships. It was the utilities, it was the home builders, it was architects, engineers, designers, all of us sort of working together. So back on the process. So you do all this, you get done, and you just want to yell that you've got success. So by this time, here it is, 4 years, 5 years in, we've got a green building tour going on every year. We've got dozens of LEED buildings now being built or finished. We've got trainings going on. We've got, by about year 4, we probably had 100 LEED certified architects, engineers, others in town. So things were moving pretty well. And what we usually do then is we start creating a myth. And Portland has this, we do this, and we are great at this. We tell the story of how great Portland is. And we don't actually go back and monitor and evaluate and find out really if it's true, because this story is a pretty compelling story. And it was in Time magazine today about, talking about different cities, what's going on, and the first thing they say, well, like in Portland, that is greener than any other place in the world. And then it goes on to compare to every place else. And so the truth is, we're okay. We do pretty well, and in some areas we do really well. But if you dig and scratch the surface, not as good as a lot of things. So what we did was we went back, monitored, did lots of evaluation, looked at things, and what we found was that we didn't really need to be in the technical assistance business anymore. We didn't need to be, in fact, what we were doing was maybe hurting business because we were giving away free advice. So we stepped back, and we found out that we should be the catalyst. We should be pushing demand. We should be promoting. We should be leading people to all of these architects and designers who now had all of these skills. And so that's where we really began to build a much stronger partnership with the business community and kind of pushing green building forward. So let me step back again to these 3 circles: political champions, great design of a program, and community support. In the green building case, again, we had some great political champions. Commissioner Dan Saltzman at the time made sort of this bold move. Sounds kind of goofy, but he put a 25-cent charge on your garbage. So if you live in a single-family home, you now pay 25 cents a month into the green building program. You don't know that, but it's part of your garbage fee. It caused the garbage haulers to circle City Hall in the garbage trucks. The whole thing lasted about 18 hours, big, and that's over. And sometimes that's what you need. You need to have political leadership. And most of the time we spend, if there's 100 hours in designing a program, we spend the last 30 minutes trying to get political support, when really what we need to do is be spending half of this time making sure you have the resources, business support, hugely important, or other kind of unseen or unnamed community leaders. Often there's people in the community that when they get up and talk about something, people just listen. And so it's really important. In Portland, some of those leaders are in the design community: Sarah Architects, Bora, Girding Edlin as a development company, and a slew of others. So pretty quickly, we learned basically for us to shut up and to let them carry the message. And so if you want sustainable solutions, don't be the mouthpiece. Try to get people who have the experience, who are credible, to be the people who are out in front sort of leading the parade, and not have it be the nonprofit or the local government that's pushing it. So during this time, another thing we did was we went back to our friends in other cities. So San Francisco, Seattle, Chicago, a little bit New York, Santa Monica, and a couple of other cities. And we began swapping everything. And because, again, none of us have enough resources, whether we're a local government, a nonprofit, state agency, or a small business. Often what you can do is sort of split up the work. Somebody does policy work, somebody else is looking at financial incentives, somebody else is doing deep research on technologies, because it was really a waste of our time to each city be doing the exact same work. And so we continue to have a really hard time doing that because it's just messy. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of communication. But it is such a money saver and a time saver, and we actually get much richer products because we're all kind of working together. Similarly, we've done that to some extent working with the business community in Portland, is finding out that there's niche businesses kind of working on the same area but a little bit different, or even in the same area. So many, we had something called PDX Lounge, where we would go to the U.S. Green Building Conference, and we would sort of set up a mini Portland. We did this 3 years in a row. And we brought businesses from other places. And in the beginning, the city kind of left this, and then pretty soon we could step back, and they were kind of doing this on their own. Well, we set up a mini Portland with bars and the whole thing. We invited, there was, thousands of people would come there on certain evenings during the conference. And while you were there, you had all of the businesses, architects and engineers and designers and developers who were doing the work, and they were able to sort of meet and feel and get a feel for what it's like to be a part of Portland, but also to be able to work together. And so there's a new building hopefully going to be built that's a partnership between Portland State University and the city of Portland and a group of nonprofits called the Oregon Sustainability Center. That's going to be built a few blocks from here. And part of the purpose of that center is to help that communication so that vertically, horizontally, that we're all working together much more closely, and that my office will be in there, the planners and sustainability folks from the city. But on the bottom floor, my hope is that it's going to be sort of this meeting center where people from the rest of the world can come to learn about what we do here. And not just learn from the university or from the city in terms of transportation and biking and energy efficiency and green building, but to actually have the companies who do that work. And so it basically becomes a place where we can use this as sort of a place to meet and sell the companies that are here, a real economic development opportunity. So, my assistant put this slide together. I haven't seen this yet. This is pretty good. So this is really a diverse bunch, don't you think? 45 to 50-year-old white people running the city. But this is what you need in Portland to make things happen. If you're at the university, you need the university president. If you're, in the city, you need 3 of these people, actually. That's what I've learned. I only need 3 because if you get 3 people, then you've got a majority and you win your vote. And so depending on the city you're in, but in Portland you need 3 votes, and then you can pretty much get things done. But really remembering who's in charge, because those are the people that need to lead. Second, excellent program design delivery. We talked a good bit about that, about not being in a vacuum, about making sure that you're working with other people, about understanding that you have to have partners. There's no way that you have enough resources to be able to get things done on your own. Another area then is community support. In best of all worlds, you do community support first, If you actually had the time to really thoroughly think through what you were trying to do, whether it was to promote solar or recycling or energy efficiency or plant more trees, or even other topics completely. If you're working on affordable, housing or child care, you want to go out and find out what people think is the problem, what they would do in terms of a solution, and go and find the leadership to be able to push it forward. If you think about really any issue, it could be the high school dropout rate, it could be asthma in kids. All of those issues, we tend to jump right in and try to solve those problems on our own without talking to people. And so, again, it's really important to pull all of this together. So, to wrap up, I'm going to talk through, let's say, a half dozen examples of programs that are going on here in Portland, and talk a little bit about how we built community support, how we got political support, how we made sure we did evaluation, when were we just thinking about data, and when were we looking at sort of community wisdom. One of the first projects is called Clean Energy Works. Clean Energy Works was an idea that was actually, I wrote my master's thesis basically on this idea a few years ago. It was in my head for at least the past 10 or 12 years, and I called it the Big Pile of Money Project. That all we needed was a really big pile of money. It had to be $2 or $3 million at a minimum. And what the problem was that we were trying to solve was that people don't weatherize their houses. And they don't weatherize their houses because it might cost, let's say, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000 to do insulation, maybe a new furnace, some windows, whatever the thing was. At a minimum, it costs that much. And if you have $6,000 or $8,000, you're going to go fix up your kitchen or your bathroom or something that all your friends can see. You're not going to put insulation in the walls and do all these things. So we found over the years, slowly but surely, a few hundred homes a year would get weatherized in Portland, and people slowly did these things. But we weren't getting any big traction. So Clean Energy Works really kind of solves this problem. It is a program that lets you go use that money that you have to go fix up your kitchen, and with no money down, go ahead and weatherize your home. So the no money down sounds like I'm the used car salesman. But what this program is you sign up, someone comes out, does the energy audit on your home, shows you the options, you pick what you want to do, you get the work done, no cost to you up front, and then you pay it off on a long-term loan of 10 to 20 years on your utility bill. So to get this done literally took us, besides getting the big pile of money, it probably took us 15 years to get the utilities to agree to have this on their bill. So when you get your bill, you now are paying, let's say, $40 less a month because your home's more efficient, you're using less heat, and then you pay about $40 a month to pay the loan off. And so it's pretty much rate neutral in terms of, or neutral in terms of your bill. So simple idea, we've all had it for a really long time. Some other cities are trying it because they can't get their utilities to agree. We actually have a pretty good relationship with the private utilities, the city and others. A lot of cities, that's definitely not true, and so they're trying to put this on the tax bill, so basically on your property tax and being able to pay it off. And the reason you want it on one of those two things is because those bills go with the house. So if I'm in the house for 5 years, at the end of the 5 years and I sell my house to Bob or to somebody else here, and the loan goes with the home. And so you can have it so that you pay it off at the time, but you also can just have the loan move over to the next person that's going to live in the house. And by doing that, you have a long-term loan. You also have really sort of patient capital, and that can take a long time to be paid off. So where leadership came in on this program is that, I guess it's been 2 or 3 years ago now, the stimulus dollars. So there was Obama money floating out every year 2 or 3 years ago now. The mayor in Portland designated $3 million of that to go towards this program. That allowed us to leverage about $3.5 million other dollars of private and philanthropic dollars. It also allowed us to prove ourselves. We've done 500 loans. We recently just got another $20 million to expand this program. So it's one of those things where you had to try it out, you had to get your first foot in the door, and then move on from there. So why were we doing this? Well, why would you do weatherization? Well, you want to do it because this was actually in our climate action plan. We were trying to do this from an energy efficiency point of view, from a greenhouse gas reduction point of view. But from a social point of view, it saves people money. It puts a lot of people to work. 1,300 people will have jobs over the first 3 years of the program. And we set it up with a community benefits agreement, which means that at least 50% of the people who are hired to do the work are women or minority firms. And so by putting all those things together, we've really created sort of a pilot that looks at sustainability beyond just environmental, but looking at the economic benefits and also the social benefits. Another great example is Gray to Green. That's what the Bureau of Environmental Services calls it. It's looking at trying to remove or build less of gray infrastructure, pipes under the ground, streets and roads, and substitute it with green infrastructure. So eco-roofs, swales, green streets. Some of these pictures, I think, are the one in the left-hand corner is right out across from PSU. So we're in the midst of I think it's $1.3 billion program right now to separate our storm sewers from the sewers. And we do that because it does rain here occasionally in Portland. And so we have these huge rushes of water. Water is just flowing through the city all the time. And we look at it currently as a problem. It's something to be dealt with and piped and gotten rid of and out to the river, instead of seeing it as something that can sink into the ground over time. And so some of the folks in the Bureau of Environmental Services probably, 8 or 9 years ago, working with the Office of Sustainable Development, we started looking at, well, maybe it's even cheaper. And so they did an engineering study of looking from Mount Tabor down to the river. I think it's 4,500 acres or maybe more. What if you dealt with all of the problems there with pipes, or what if you dealt with it all with green solutions? And what they came up with was a 5-year plan that includes 43 acres of eco-roofs, 900 new Green Street facilities, and 80,000 trees. And when you look at the entire area and compare it to what we would have to do in terms of pipes, it's going to save $58 million. So huge difference. We knew this 8 or 10 years ago when we were first starting on the huge, the $1.3 billion project, but EPA wouldn't buy it. They were like, yeah, that's not going to work. We need pipes. This is beginning to prove that it can work, and that you actually can deal with the water flows in the city in a different way. Another thing I think about, and I'm going to talk about bikes in a second, is that when you look at the issue of stormwater and eco-roofs, so eco-roofs is a good example. Does anybody here have an eco-roof on their house? Or on their building? Or on their building, yeah, your house building where you both live and work. So you don't put those because you're thinking about global warming generally. You're doing it, and you're doing all of those other things that I showed here because it's beautiful. It's a way to soften the edges of the city. It's a way to make it a more interesting place to live. Sure, in the back of your mind, it's sucking up stormwater, and it may, even if it's on your roof, you may be reducing energy costs or cooling costs or heating costs. But primarily, you're doing it because it kind of feels good and because it's beautiful. And so when you look at biking, same thing. Maybe 10% of Portlanders, maybe even 20% of Portlanders are on their bike every day because they're fighting climate change. But for most people, you do it because it makes you feel good, because you can do it with your friends and your family and your kids, and you don't have to go to the gym then. It saves you time. It saves you money. Probably, this is a scientific guess that I'm making right now, 30% of people in Portland ride their bike because they want to be seen riding their bike. And that's everybody, right? Okay, let's see. Don't raise your hand if you've never done that. I mean, every one of us at some time has been on their bike, probably, because I'm kind of expected to be on my bike right now because that's the norm. That's what we're supposed to do. And if we're in Portland, I've had friends who are probably $500 an hour lawyers who it's really cool to have helmet hair when you come into that meeting, right? And so one reason and one way to change behavior, again, it's not facts. It's not even our own emotions that are saying, oh, I want to do this just because it feels right. It's because we want to be a part of the pack. We want to be sort of like in with the cool kids. Maybe we weren't in with the cool kids in junior high, and so now we finally can do that. And so that, I think, is what causes behavior change. And I know it's true for green building. I know it's true for, definitely recycling. You go, most obvious, most normative, sustainable behavior that we have, your neighbor puts out their roll cart. You put out your roll cart because you aren't going to be the only one in your neighborhood without it. And if you don't, your kids are going to go yell at you because you didn't go and do it just like everybody else. So in Portland, 94% of people in single-family homes put out their roll carts. They're involved. They're highest percentage in the country. We participate. We recycle 67% of all of our residential and commercial waste in Portland. Average in the U.S. is about 34%. So we do this. Do we do it because of climate change? Probably not. And yet it's one of a really big impact on climate change in Portland is the amount that we recycle. We're just that kind of city. We recycle, we bike. I don't think there's any other city where you could have a city council member get an idea in his head that he was going to do this economic development program. And it was going to be based in Portland, but it was all about farmers in eastern Oregon he was going to convince to plant canola, crush the seeds, make biodiesel, and then have a contract directly with the city of Portland for our facilities and buy that and have our trucks and vehicles use B20 or up to B99. And at the same time, he said, well, what if we just require diesel sold in Portland, all diesel, and we won't even tell anybody because if you only put 5%, it's not going to hurt anybody's car. We'll just make B5 sort of the standard. It's the norm. And so Randy Leonard, known for his calm and easygoing ways, gets this idea in his head. And he calls me up, and I don't know how many of you know about the commission form of government that we have for Portland. So most of you. So as bureau directors, we actually work directly for one of the city council members. Unlike most normal cities where you have a city manager or a strong mayor and a city council where we all work for the mayor. We each worked for others. I didn't work for Randy, but Randy was calling me up at 10 at night. He had these ideas. He wanted biodiesel. The result was literally in 4 months we had an ordinance done. We talked to everybody. We pushed it through. We had people flying in from Texas in blue suits, a lot of big guys, saying that this was illegal, you weren't allowed to do this at the city level. And right now, if you have a diesel car, you can get B99 all over the city, and there's probably 12, 13 different places you can buy it. But when you pull up to the pump, you don't know it, but you're getting 5% biodiesel. And what is done is a huge economic development push in terms of creating sort of this urban-rural connection, and in terms of economic development. That's money. That's at least 5% of that diesel money is staying somewhere here in Oregon. Another favorite example that I have is a program called Solar Now, and then another one is Solarize Portland. How many of you have heard of Solarize Portland? A few. Well, 5 years ago, we had great recycling, we had great energy efficiency, biking, transit, all of these things that you all are involved in, but we really didn't have a great solar program. And in fact, most people thought, when you go down back to those data and facts, that it was too cloudy here to do solar. And then we went and looked. And it ends up that we have more solar here in Portland than most of the whole country of Germany, which is the leading country in terms of implementing solar. So we knew that actually we do have enough solar. So we started something called Solar Now. We lined up all the utilities, the Energy Trust of Oregon, the state. We put together all the incentives and a cool package, did the traditional marketing program, 75 to 80% tax credits and incentives. And we moved the bar from about 30 a year, all the way to 100. And we thought we'd done really well. Well, things then changed. And a group of neighbors in Southeast Portland got together and said, well, that's great. Good try, government. But we have a better idea. What if we just get all friends all together and we do one big contract and we just do one bid and we have one solar contractor come in and that's going to make the price fall big time and I bet I can sign up all my friends. And we said, go for it, and what can we do to help? And so the result was that just in a few years' time, 2008 we started Solar Now. 2009, we kind of, we had tripled it almost. We'd gone from like 30 to 90 systems. Solarize Portland comes in, and in just a few years we've really moved from about 50 systems to 550. This is all based on people wanting to be part of the Solarize Portland family. And so again, that head, heart, by the book norm thing, people want to be part of the group. And so we're looking now that this is probably the best model for showing we're now going, there's a dozen things we could do in the same way. People in Portland, a lot of people are joiners. They want to be a part of sort of a movement. And the power of, peer pressure, keeping up with the Joneses is what got us from 50 to 550 in a year. And I think next year, that's just for this year, I think we're going to have another, 1,000 installations for 2011. So things are moving quickly. Last example, the Best Business Center, a really good example of normative behavior. We have something called Best. You can go to bestbusinesscenter.org and find out about all the different kinds of services we have to help businesses, be more energy efficient, water efficient, recycle, and get bus passes for their employees, bikes, whatever. For 15 years, we tried to do energy efficiency with businesses. Nobody bites. Once we call it sustainability, everybody wants to do it now. What is that? They don't even know what sustainability means. And in fact, we'd all have a different definition in this room if we talked about what does sustainability mean. In fact, 2 years ago, I had a multinational, huge company call me up and offer me a great job, like double what I've ever made. And they wanted me to green up their company. And so I went to a couple interviews in cool places and gave them a whole pile of free consulting, basically, of ideas of things they could do, and realized that I didn't think I could work there because of the ethic. They just wanted me to green them up. And they were willing to do all things. And the reason they wanted to do it was because they were finding that their competition was attracting all the quality, smart, talented young people out of school because they were a green business. And this company wasn't. And they saw 100% that the only reason they were doing it wasn't their philosophy, but was it to attract talent. And so I said, I didn't really want to be a part of that. But, in the end, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter if that's the reason why they're taking action. Because in the end, it gets us where we need to go. And so I think that's really sort of the point is, a lot of us, especially in Portland, can sort of be on our high horse about, why sustainability it's important and it's the right thing to do. But in the end, to do behavior change, you need to look at a whole set of tools to make things happen. You need good data. You need lots of community wisdom. You need to get out there. You need to understand what people really want. You got to build partnerships. Nobody can do this on their own. You got to get kids involved. And really, that's the reason we do all this. So thanks. Here's my information if we... Happy to answer questions.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. If folks have questions, we have 10 minutes or so that we can have a discussion. So please come up to the floor microphone if you have something you'd like to ask. Okay. The sun is calling, I can understand.
I'm curious about how we can use this peer pressure a little more. I think it's a great motivator.
I think it's one of those things where we can't be the instigator. We're the man, So we're government. But we can sort of be the catalyst a little bit in terms of getting information to the community leaders. And so one of the best ways to create change is to try and understand who the sort of unofficial leaders are, whether it's in industry, small business, who are the people that everybody else looks to make decisions, and trying to work with them first. So that's something that we've tried to do a lot of. That and hipster bikers, that works, I think. I think if we get those folks doing things. The other thing is, I think we've talked about, this is, I don't know if these are the right words, but soccer moms. So even though we're urban soccer moms. So a lot of my friends, they became moms. They work part-time. They have all this energy. And what do? They go set up recycling. And as soon as recycling was done, we should have had something next for them to do. We should have had Solarize Portland right there. And then we should have had the habitat cleanup thing. And then we should have had, 100 different things. Not just about environmental issues, but about, childcare and daycare, because there are tons of isolated people in Portland who have all sorts of great ideas, and they just want to be connected and have a way to be able to get those ideas out.
Thanks. Other questions, comments?
I wanted to ask about Oregon Energy Works, or Portland Energy Works, and if the loan and the reduced energy through the utility bill, if that actually reduces the revenue for those utilities? And if so, how did you get them on board? Because then they would be making less money.
Right. So that's a problem much bigger than just Clean Energy Works. So I don't know. It's been more than 10 years ago. There was a statewide law that set up a 3% on your bill. If you look at your electric bill, there is a 3% public benefits charge. And what happened was, for all the years before that time, the utilities ran their own energy conservation programs. And they had this huge internal conflict because they were basically encouraging customers not to buy their product. And so we kind of took that away from them, put a fee on everyone's bill, because you were still paying for those programs even when they were part of the utility. They were just an allowed cost that they could go to the Public Utility Commission with. So we shifted all those costs more directly on the consumer, moved them over to the Energy Trust of Oregon. And so there's less disincentive now. And part of that is there's something called decoupling. What we really want to be able to do is have the utilities be indifferent to it, that they make the same amount of money whether they sell one less kilowatt hour or one more. That's what we want to do. And the gas company is set up sort of like that. So if you ever want to talk about it, I can explain that a little bit more to you. But what we really want to do is have it not have a disincentive to conserve. If you look at, is anyone here from the city? Oh, darn, this is being taped. I'm going to say it anyway. So the Water Bureau, so we have great water conservation programs in Portland. We could probably do more. Lots of city utilities, same thing. I have friends who work in Austin at the electric utility there. They had the best of incentives or of intentions. But it's the same issue, really, because if they sell less, they have fixed costs, and especially with water where, 90% of their costs or 95% of the cost isn't the water, it's the infrastructure, and they still have to pay those bills. So it is a big issue.
Thanks. Other questions? You have to go to the floor, Mike.
Hi. So I'm interested in knowing what your perspective is about trying to keep issues local and people thinking locally rather than globally. Do we resolve some of these problems in our communities with this connectedness issue that you've proposed? I'm just really excited about that. But just your thoughts about being local versus global.
I think very few of us are global, because it's too big and it's too hard to understand, and it's over there. And so really all we can do are things local. That's the things that kind of gets to our heart thing. and the normative behavior. It's really hard for us to act on behalf of something huge like the environment or the world. So I think most of our actions really tend to be on the local. The other part of it is the issues like global warming are so big that we can't have the visceral reaction that causes action. So if you can actually see a stream totally polluted and dead fish, you're going to go do something about it because you can see it, and you're going to react, and you're going to have lots of fire in the belly to go work on it and fix it. But climate change, kind of hard. And so I think a lot of environmental issues, we tend to do best when there's a crisis. You know, when, I don't know when it was in the 60s or 70s when rivers were lighting on fire and stuff, you know, people reacted. You know, we had Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, because people were literally dying because of it. Now our environmental issues are a little more hidden, so I do think it makes it a lot harder.
I'm just 3 months new here to Portland, coming from the Phoenix metro area, and
Are you riding your bike yet?
I'm walking. I'm going to be on the bus after this.
Do you recycle?
I do.
Okay.
No, in fact,
we have to kick you out otherwise.
I mean, Phoenix metro, obviously, light years behind in so many ways to what you're talking about, and a big draw for us here. But I'm curious, as I'm learning the lay of the land, and I hear a lot of people describe Portland as a metro area playing second fiddle to the Seattles and the San Franciscos and the West Coast. Is the work of what's happening at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, do you see that causing a tipping point economically for this metro region to, you know, with the joblessness situation, and, you know, is there a tipping point coming both environmentally and economically, some coalescing of these forces?
So we have a friendly sort of competition between Vancouver, BC, Seattle, Portland, and San Francisco. And so the directors of those four sort of offices are always kind of trying to, and the mayors, they're always trying to one-up each other. We all have specialties, and we all do things differently. What we have here is, you know, they do those bell curves where they show the early adopters, and that's like 10 or 15%, and then you got all the, you know, the majority in the middle, and it takes a really long time, and then there's people at the end who will never do whatever it is you're trying to do. The early adopters in Portland, I think it's about 45% of the population. You know, it's big. And so that's what we have kind of that's different than the other places. They have big ones too compared to the rest of the U.S., but we really kind of have that. That's one of our tools. What we don't have is the ability to draw lots of capital. And so San Francisco and Seattle and Vancouver beat us out every time. We don't have lots of venture capital here. We have an enormous number of small businesses. Again, probably more, you know, per capita small business kind of thing going on in Portland. But we also have a tendency to want to run companies with 7 to 10 people in them. And if they get much bigger than that, that's kind of why we moved here, you know, because we didn't want to start a company, and if it starts getting too big, we kind of sell out usually and start over again. And so that does tend to be sort of an ethos, I think, that's here too. That said, I would have to go get the citation, but we're supposed to be the second or third city in terms of small business in sort of the green tech field. So solar, energy efficiency, water, you know, renewables, recycling, all of those areas. We just have a really robust, both in terms of manufacturing, but also in terms of services. And so I think that will be, and it's still, right now we're in a leadership position. If we don't move on it and really put a real push, the Portland Development Commission has named it as like their, you know, one of their top issues that they're going to focus on in terms of a target industry as an export. If we don't do that, we're going to lose out because we're not as big as, you know, New York and Chicago and San Francisco, and they all want it. You know, Chicago calls me all the time and says, "No, we're the greenest city," and I'm like, "Yeah, you know, because they have so much money to put into some of these things and a lot of political will." So I worry that we're going to be left in the dust sometimes. We've got lots of ideas and lots of small nonprofits running around and bumping into each other and competing for very limited resources. And sometimes I'm not sure that we're really going to be able to pull it, all together to really make money while we're doing this. I think we'll definitely always be one of the greenest or the greenest city in the U.S. in terms of our carbon footprint and some of those things, but not so sure about the business piece that we'll definitely get there. In terms of being the greenest city too, though, you also know that New York City definitely has the smallest greenhouse footprint per capita. They're dense. They don't get in their car. They live in smaller places, even with having to have heat bills that are sky high compared to ours. So that's an issue that Portland's dealing with and that we're looking at in the Portland plan in terms of our land use plan for the next 25 years is, how do we make density in Portland be the new normal? How do we make it so that we all say that we want to live in a place, we don't want to live in the Pearl necessarily, but we want to live in a place that sort of embraces our own neighborhood, but that we can walk to a coffee shop and to the park and to the school and the cleaners and all the things that we need in our day. And we don't want to have to get in a car. We want to be able to walk and ride our bikes. And if we do that, that means we have to have enough people live there to support all of these small businesses. And so that's what I'm bumping up against right now in terms of long-range planning is how do we make Portland a city that is walkable in all parts of the city, not just in inner southeast, so that we can do those things. So I think that's sort of our next big round of challenges. It's not going to be about recycling and getting on our bikes. It's going to be about land use and density.
Well, thank you all for your participation and attendance this evening. We are very lucky to have one of the city's most committed decision makers here with us this evening to talk with us about how decisions are made at the city level. So please join me in sharing our collective thanks to Susan for spending time with us today.